Welcome to another edition of Pointcast with me, Lucian, coming to you from Beijing. My guest today is a visiting research collaborator at Princeton University and former Iranian nuclear negotiator Seyed Hossein Mousavian. He's joining us from Princeton University in the United States. We're going to talk about the just concluded talks between the US and Iran sides in Islamabad, Pakistan, and what potentially will happen going forward. But before we begin our conversation, I'd really like to say thank you to all of those who have been following us, who have subscribed to our channel, and a big thank you to those who are doing this at this moment. Help us improve by encouraging us and leave with us your comments and suggestions, questions, even criticism. I read each and every one of them, and I'll take a note of them. Next time I'm doing my show, I always try to improve and do a better job. So thank you very much for doing that in advance. And let's start my conversation with Mr. Mousavian. Mr. Mousavian, welcome to the Pointcast.
Thank you for having me.
So the latest news that came out of the negotiations is that the talks ended without a positive outcome. Basically, some people are saying the talks collapsed. What is your take of what happened in Islamabad, and why do you think the talks ended after 21 hours of so-called marathon meetings? Do you expect the talks to resume, to pick up for a second round in the next days?
I believe nobody could expect to have a final agreement between Iran and the US, specifically after 40 days of war, 48 years of hostilities. But there is some positive issues, like the fact that for the first time after 48 years, Iran and the US had the direct negotiations at the highest level. We had during Obama at the level of foreign ministers, but we never had any type of direct negotiations with the President Trump administrations, neither in the first term nor in the second term, having direct negotiations at the highest level, even higher than the level during President Obama. After the two wars, I think this was something considerably important. Second positive issue is that it was not only the two high-level officials. Each team, they had tens of expertise in different areas: security, political, legal, and economic issues. And the expertise also, they had opportunity for the first time to sit together to discuss the mutual concerns or grievances or demands they have.
I find one of the points that you mentioned very interesting, the highest level, and this is really that's why it's an about turn in a lot of people's expectation, because Iran certainly had very little to trust on the US side, right, after so much that has happened for obvious reasons. And what do you think is prompting the US side to send a vice presidential delegation, first of all? And what is prompting the Iranian side also to send such a high level delegation, given the very, very low level of trust they have in the United States administration at this moment?
First of all, the mistrust is mutual. It is not something new. Second, Iranians, despite the deep mistrust they have had for many years, they always have been ready, and they have proved that they are ready to engage direct negotiations or indirect negotiations. They have never left the diplomacy table. You can see during last 30 years between Iran and the US, always they have been ready to negotiate. But this time, the situation is different. The reason is that the major assumption of the US and Israel attacking Iran in 2025 was that Iran would collapse after 2, 3 days. I mean, this was the assessment of Israeli Americans before the war. But they attacked in 2025. Iran resisted for 12 days, and in the day 10, the Israelis, they were under severe pressure from Iranian missile drone attacks. That's why Netanyahu asked President Trump to help Israel to bring a ceasefire. Okay, President Trump asked Iran to stop. Ceasefire was established. But again, despite the fact in 2025 they were negotiating, there was significant progress during the negotiations. Deal was within reach, but the U.S. attacked and failed to accomplish the main assumption or the main objective. Nevertheless, I think the U.S. made the second mistake, the same mistake in 2026 when the two negotiators they were negotiating in Europe. Significant progress achieved. They were very close to have a deal, but again, as the New York Times published a full report, Prime Minister Netanyahu convinced President Trump if we attack Iran, Iran would collapse in 2, 3 days. Okay, they attacked again. They left the diplomacy negotiation table, and it took 38 years. Neither Iran collapsed, nor the U.S. could achieve
You mean 38 days? You
yeah,
mean 38 days?
the war took 38 days. Of course, the US and Israel attacked Iran, thousands of locations, thousands of people they were killed or injured, over 100,000 non-military buildings they were destroyed, hospitals, schools. I mean, they gave a huge damage to Iran. But at the same time, Iran was able to attack all US military bases in the region, 17 military bases. It was unprecedented issue after the Second World War. No country was able to attack American military bases in the region, and Iran could respond, reciprocate, retaliate, attacking Israel with thousands of drones and missiles. And then President Trump again. And then we had a regional war. We had energy crisis. Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz was almost closed. The rising price of oil. We had
Oil.
a lot of problem. Then President Trump was really in a situation to try to end the war. That's why the U.S. came again to negotiate. But Iranians, the reason they came is exactly the reason they were coming before, during Obama, during Trump. Always they were ready for diplomacy. Nevertheless, I think as I said, this round of talks in Islamabad, I told you one positive, important point. I would mention another important point. You remember President Trump designated IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard, as a terrorist organization, and Iran also designated CENTCOM as a terrorist organization. But it is interesting to see that CENTCOM officials, they were in Islamabad. IRGC high commanders, they were there. And even there was an opportunity for CENTCOM and IRGC. They sit together and they talk about the security, military issues in the region. I mean, the two
So
sides.
sorry to interrupt here, Mr. Mousavian. When you talk about CENTCOM, help us understand. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that term, please.
Is actually the Central Command of American Armed Forces in the Middle East. You know, the all
Okay.
military bases in the Middle East is under CENTCOM. You know, CENTCOM is the center for
Okay.
the military operation of United States in the Middle East. And the counterpart of CENTCOM is Iranian Quds Army on the Revolutionary Guard, which both sides, they had already designated each other as a terrorist organizations. And now they met For the first time after the designation, they met in Islamabad and they negotiated. Ghalibaf himself, of course, is the Speaker of Parliament, but everyone knows he is one of the highest level Revolutionary Guard commanders. Therefore, I think this is something important. And the next issue is that although they did not achieve final agreement, they have not closed the door for diplomacy, and it is possible they will meet again in next coming days or weeks.
Um, what gives the Iranian side this time the I wouldn't say illusion or the hope that the negotiations will produce some kind of agreement that will be binding for the Trump administration, for the US administration?
You know, the core issue, to my understanding, is for the US to decide whether the US wants a deal with Iran based on international rules, norms, regulations, or not. Whether they want Iran to be a country committed to international treaties, norms, laws, regulations, or not. If they are really seeking for an Iran to be fully committed with international laws, then the major issue is about the nuclear. And we have non-proliferation treaty as the most important and the only international non-proliferation treaty on the table. The US should decide to resolve the nuclear crisis with Iran within the framework of NPT or a US framework. If they're going to decide Iran to remain as member of NPT and to make a deal within the framework of NPT, then the US should understand NPT has rights versus commitments. Iranian commitments to seek no nuclear weapon, Iran to remain as a non-nuclear weapon state, and for the US to respect the rights of Iran for peaceful nuclear technology based on Article 4 of Non-Proliferation Treaty NPT. Because this article says with no discrimination, every member must enjoy the peaceful nuclear technology, and every NPT member is obliged, mandated to cooperate on peaceful nuclear technology. Therefore, the US is also a member of NPT. Iran is a member of NPT. Therefore, the deal should have two bases. One base to define a comprehensive package for Iran to commit to maximum level of transparency measures, to have open nuclear program, to give every access to IAEA, International Atomic Energy, in Vienna, to have full inspection, supervision, control of Iranian nuclear program, and for the US to respect the rights of Iran for peaceful nuclear technology, including enrichment, like other members of NPT. Japan has enrichment,
Yeah.
Brazil, Argentina,
Hmm.
Germany, Netherlands, they are all members of NPT. They don't have nuclear weapon, but they have enrichment. And however, it was exactly the deal was agreed in 2015 called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action between President Obama's administration, Iran, the world community, China, Russia, Europe. They all assigned, and Iran was in full compliance with zero failure. And it was the most comprehensive agreement during the history of non-proliferation. And Iranian program was completely under the control of IAEA, and every report of IAEA confirmed the peaceful nature of Iranian nuclear program, the Iranian nuclear program. The problem came when the US withdrew and violated the deal. Then Iranian decreased their commitments, and again IAEA found some technical ambiguities. Again, they can go back to the same deal. Nevertheless, to be realistic, President Trump wants more than JCPOA because JCPOA was the legacy of Obama and he didn't care whether this was good or bad. He decided to kill Obama's legacy. In order to give President Trump JCPOA plus, we have, as you know, with other nuclear scientists at Princeton University, we proposed a nuclear enrichment multilateral consortium in the Persian Gulf. Because as you know, Saudi Arabia also is seeking enrichment. Iran already has enrichment. If Saudi Arabia has enrichment, Turkey will have, I mean, they will ask for enrichment. Egypt, they will have, then we will have multiple countries looking for enrichment. This will increase the risk of non-proliferation in the region. That's why before 2025 war, US-Israeli war against Iran, with other nuclear scientists at Princeton University, we suggested a multilateral enrichment mechanism in the region under the IAEA to be participated by all Middle Eastern countries, even the US, China, Russia, they can participate. This would be international multilateral enrichment rather than national enrichment. This would be the most sustainable solution to guarantee non-proliferation in the Persian Gulf and Middle East, although Israel is not member of NPT, and Israel is the only country in the Middle East with nuclear weapon, with no sanctions, no pressure, there are no limits, no coercion strategy, but they have over 100 nuclear weapons, and every pressure is on Iran because Iran is member of NPT and does not have nuclear weapon. Therefore, the US also should decide in the next step to stop these double standards for the Middle East. One country to have nuclear weapon with all supports,
So,
other country they even to be deprived from their rights under NPT for peaceful nuclear technology. Nevertheless, my formula for a deal is JCPOA plus, which President Trump is looking, is JCPOA, which proved successful, plus a regional multilateral enrichment consortium, which would be regional and international.
do you think President Trump, in his second term, is interested in such an agreement that rests on the premise of respect of international law and norms? Because it seems that his administration has indeed very little regard to international law and norms, and the kind of goalpost has been shifting. In the beginning, it was no nuclear weapon, and then no enrichment, and then again we're hearing the talk about no nuclear weapon. At the end, we do not know. I mean, me at least do not know exactly what is the United States trying to press Iran on in terms of the question of enrichment. Is the United States still asking for no enrichment at all or no nuclear weapon? Does Iran know?
I think the US position on zero enrichment is not a real US position. This is Israeli demand. That's why the US is pushing Iran for zero enrichment because of Israel. And you know, this has been Israeli position from 1990, asking the US to attack Iran. That time, even Iran did not have enrichment. 10 years before any enrichment in Iran, Israelis, they were asking the US to attack Iran. Therefore, Israel policy, as Prime Minister Netanyahu openly, publicly said, his strategy is Greater Middle East. And you heard from American ambassador in Israel.
Greater Israel.
Yes, he said.
Greater Israel.
Prime Minister Netanyahu publicly said his strategy is Greater Israel in the Middle East. It
Yeah.
means many Muslim countries, they should be occupied and their territory should be annexed to the Israeli to become a greater Israel in the Middle East. And more surprisingly, you heard the American ambassador in Israel who said officially in an interview with Fox News, he said, yes, this is the right of Israel to get other Middle Eastern countries to achieve greater Israel. Therefore, this strategy has nothing to do with Iranian nuclear program. This is far, far, far beyond the nuclear program. And even it has nothing to do only with Iran, because you have seen the wars during the last 20, 30 years. Syria has been destroyed. Iraq has been attacked. Afghanistan has been attacked. Libya has been destroyed. Lebanon continuously under attack. Yemen has been attacked. Somalia has been attacked. Sudan has been attacked. All major Muslim countries have been either under attack or pressures, and the last one was Iran. And I think if Iran is over, they will go after Turkey, as the foreign minister of Turkey just said. After Iran, they are going to come after Turkey. This is a big plan. That's why the issues like nuclear, terrorism, human rights, this is not the real issues. Therefore, the US should decide either they will go for implementation of hundreds of UN resolutions to establish two-state solution to resolve Palestinian crisis, because we have about 400 United Nations resolutions about Palestinian crisis, and overwhelming majority of these resolutions are insisting on two-state solution, and Israel says no. No to a state solution, only one Israel, one state. And now they are saying no, not only one Israel, one state, greater Israel. It means the major part of the whole Middle East. If this is the strategy, we are not going to have any solution, neither about Palestinian issue, nor about Iranian issue, and nor about peace stability in the Middle East.
Do you think then, Mr. Mousavian, given the strong hold Israeli lobby has over the Trump administration, at least from this war we can tell, given the strong influence to the Trump administration, to the US politics in general, the talks between Iran and the United States will have any reigning power over Israel's plan to achieve greater Israel in the Middle East? Do you think, the fact that both sides, the US and Iran, sit down together, and even if they can hammer out a deal, that deal is not going to be sabotaged by Israel this time?
I am afraid even if there is going to be a deal again, the deal would be sabotaged by the Israeli lobby pressure in the United States. Yes, I think every Iran-US rapprochement during last 40 years have been disturbed by Israeli pressures. JCPOA was the example everyone now understands, that there was a deal. US agreed. Every permanent member of United Nations Security Council agreed. We had UN resolution adopting the deal. We had IAEA resolution adopting the deal. The deal was in full force for 4 years. Iran had zero failure in complying the deal, but at the end, Israelis, they were successful to
So, yeah.
convince the American president to kill and to attack. I mean, this is a big, big risk. Nevertheless, the situation in public opinion worldwide is now gradually is changing, specifically after Israeli war on Gaza, after about 70,000 Palestinians, they were killed, 200,000 they were injured, 2.5 million people they were destroyed, and then Israeli war on Lebanon, Israeli US war on Iraq. The international public opinion, even in the US public opinion, is changing now. 70% of Americans, they are against war. And President Trump himself said, I'm not happy because majority of Americans, they want to end the war. I mean, this is something which may change the course.
Okay. Just now you mentioned two major issues that are standing in the way of the negotiators. What specifically do you mean by that?
The first one was nuclear, which I mentioned, and we discussed how we can resolve it. The second one now is about Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. is
Sorry, Mr. Mousavian. In terms of the nuclear issue, you were talking about a modality of a consortium, a regional consortium of enrichment, right? You were
yes, I
suggesting
was
that.
I was talking about two modalities. Where first was a non-proliferation treaty as the criteria of a deal, commitments versus rights.
Mhm.
The US respect the non-proliferation treaty and do not try to discriminate Iran to be deprived from its legitimate legal rights under NPT. This is the first principle. With JCPOA exactly was this more because JCPOA was the most comprehensive agreement during history of non-proliferation, and
Yeah,
Iranian commitments on their JCPOA was far beyond NPT. Limits, inspections, far, far beyond NPT. It was practically NPT-2, which Iran accepted and was implementing. The reason Iran was implementing, because the rights of Iran was respected. Then Iran accepted every transparency, every limit. They
hmm,
have no problem because they were not
yeah,
after nuclear bomb. The second issue, which I mentioned, President Trump wants JCPOA plus. This is a fact. Um, the issue is about enrichment. The issue is in national enrichment in Iran. If we go for a regional enrichment multilateral consortium, this
I
would be
see.
regional, this would be international. Even the world powers, they would be able to participate. This would be under IAEA full control, and we will not have any more national enrichment in the
I
region.
understand.
Then
Do you
the
think,
US should push Israel to give up their nuclear bombs in order to have Middle East free from nuclear weapons. This was about the nuclear, which we discussed. The second is about the Strait of Hormuz. Now the US has already threatened Iran for blockade. You have heard they are going to block every navigation to Iran, but nobody is asking why. Because Strait of Hormuz was open before revolution, after revolution. 47 years, we had no problem about navigation in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz. Even after the first war, 2025, when Israel and the US they attacked Iran didn't close the Strait of Hormuz even after the war. But this time, the reason Iran decided to put some limits on the Strait of Hormuz because Iranian felt that this war is really existential threat. The US is after regime change, which President Trump publicly said he prefers regime change.
Mhm.
The US is after Iranian oil because American officials, they said, you heard from Director of Energy at White House. He openly, publicly told Fox News, our main goal was to control Iranian oil reserves. You heard from Senator Lindsey Graham saying our goal is regime change and controlling Iranian oil and Khark Island. I mean, American officials, they very publicly, they revealed the issue is not about nuclear, is about Iranian oil reserves. And we know they are going to control the oil reserves not only in Iran, Venezuela, and we know this has also some relation with the big games between the big powers. They want to control China, and one way to control China is to control the energy and the oil in everywhere in the world. I mean, this is a far beyond Iranian issue. Now, we are coming to a Strait of Hormuz. The first issue is that there was no problem. It was the US who made, with the second war, made existential threat to Iran, and Iran decided to use every card they have. I mean, they had to defend their existence. The problem now is whether Iran is ready to again to lift the limits on her Strait of Hormuz. Iran said yes, we are ready to lift and go back to free navigation if there would be a deal between Iran and the US. But if the US is going to continue war, sanctions, pressures, then we are going to defend our existence. There are two realities about this strait. One reality is that this is international law and waterways. Based on international law, Strait of Hormuz should be open for international navigation. This is one fact. And Iran cannot close Strait of Hormuz for long term. Yes, under international law for short period during a war, the countries they can close it, but it cannot be long term. Long term. Therefore, international law says Strait of Hormuz should be open for free for navigation. The second issue is that the Strait of Hormuz is water territory of Iran and Oman. And Iran and Oman, they have a treaty before revolution. It has nothing to do with after revolution. It is 1974 treaty between Iran and Oman that these two countries will jointly manage the Strait of Hormuz. Therefore, now we need to find a formula that the Strait of Hormuz would be open, American existential threat to Iran would be removed, and within a big deal, Iran also will go back to the previous status quo of free navigation in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz.
That leads us to this big question. What is the basis for the negotiation for the two sides? Because there is this 10-point plan, and supposedly it's said to have two versions. One is the version that the Iran has announced to the world. The other is the version that the Iran side has made to the US side for negotiation. And then there is the 15-point plan that's raised by the United States. It seems that there is a lot of confusion as to what exactly are the two sides working on in terms of all of the issues that you mentioned so far, the nuclear weapon, the Strait of Hormuz. What is your understanding of exactly what version are the two sides having in their hand when they're talking, when they're trying to finalize the agreement?
I think first the US put the 15-point plan on the table, Iran rejected, which was a plan contained the maximum demand of the US. This was maximalist demand. And then in return, Iran put forward the 10-point plan, which, frankly speaking, it was again maximal demand from the Iranian side. Therefore, each side, they proposed that a 15-point, 10-point plan, which included the maximalist demands of each party. They decided to negotiate both plans, not only Iranian plan or American plan. They went to Islamabad, as President Trump said, and as Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, said, we were very close to a deal. This means they have already agreed at least on major part of the two plans. When the US president says we agreed almost on everything except nuclear, he said we
My
agreed.
understanding, I'm sorry, Mr. Mousavian, my understanding is that President Trump said the Iranian 10-point plan was the working basis, was a basis that's workable for the negotiations. It was in
Yes, he said,
White
yes,
House
you are
statement.
right.
Yeah.
He said, but he really didn't mean that he has canceled the American 15-point plan. I mean, we should be realistic. First, the US was only insisting on his own 15-point plan. Then the US accepted also to consider the Iranian 10-point plan. Therefore, the realistic understanding is that both proposals were on the table in Islamabad. And as Iranian foreign minister said, And as the US president said, they had a lot of progress, achievements, agreements, and there were some issues left to be agreed, which I said, to my understanding, reading all reports out of these negotiations, the two major issues was nuclear and the Strait of Hormuz, which we discussed. Now, either because President Trump in his tweet said, I don't want 90%, I don't want 95%, I want 100% of what the US wants. If every side is going to insist on 100% of its demand, we never would have be able to have a deal.
Sure.
In order to have a deal, both parties need to show flexibility. Maximalist 100%, each side, it means continuation of devastating war, indefinite war, for nobody knows for how many years. Therefore, what we need now for Americans and for Iranians to show mutual flexibility on the two remaining issues and to have the second round of negotiations in Islamabad between Speaker Ghalibaf and Vice President Vance and to finalize the deal.
Well, I certainly hope that there are overlapping grounds, that they are coming towards each other, in the process of the negotiation, that they can eventually come to an agreement. However, it does seem, rightfully, as you said, both versions are maximalistic, so it's like there are irreconcilable goals. One is for Iran not to do enrichment. The other is, Iran insists on having enrichment as a sovereign right. So are you going to give up part of your sovereign right to exchange for peace? And we really have to see whether the two sides are going to shorten the list of their differences and lengthen their list of agreements. So it is your guess, Mr. Mousavian, that probably the two sides could come back for more negotiations?
If this is only the US and Iranian intention, I believe they will come back. If Israelis are going to push the US like before, I think there would be a problem, and I'm not optimistic.
What's at stake here, though?
I think there should be a US decision. It is not Iranian decision. The US should decide whether they want to follow the Israeli policy of war on Iran, dismantling Iran, or to want to make Iran as a friend. I mean, if they are going to make a deal, then the bilateral relations would be de-escalated, and Iran US can gradually revive their bilateral relation, a real peace and sustainable peace, good for Americans, good for Iranians. But the problem is that neither we can understand, nor the world also is really angry about the greater Israeli strategy of war on Iraq, on war on Iran, on war on Yemen, war on Gaza. This is something which would be the big issue.
Finally, a question about you, Mr. Mousavian. You were interviewed by CNN in early March, and you were later criticized by White House Communications Director Stephen Chen, who said your remarks, he was criticizing CNN. By the way, he called you an Iranian terrorist, and he said CNN was regurgitating talking points from the Iranian Pravda based on unverified information. What exactly happened?
No, the problem, it is not only this case. Talking in the US about peace between Iran and the US, immediately you would be accused of supporting regime, terrorist, and all these nasty labels. And we have the same situation in Iran. We have the same hardliners in Iran. If you talk in Iran about peace with the US, the hardliners in Iran would accuse you of spy, the puppet of the US, spy of CIA, a spy of Mossad. And this is exactly the same situation we have in two countries, because there are hardliners in the US which they really do not want peace with Iran. There are hardliners in Iran which they do not like peace with the US. Therefore, anyone here or in Iran is going to call for peace Diplomacy would be accused. It is not something surprising.
Um, why is the Iranian government still pursuing the possibility of negotiated peace with the United States against the kind of extreme public criticism they may face domestically?
See, as I said, this has been the Iranian strategy for past decades. This is not something new. They have kept the door for diplomacy open. But this time, after the two wars, the level of trust has decreased dramatically. And when Iranians are coming to any negotiation table, their perception is that maybe again the US after deceiving Iran and to attack Iran. Therefore, they come to negotiate, they keep the door for diplomacy open, but they do not trust at the same time. And their assumption is that this is again a game by the US to buy time and to attack Iran.
Is there one thing, if I ask you now, is there one thing that you want to mention after all the discussion we had that you think is important, is essential for the audience to understand the situation in Iran, about Iran?
I think Iranians now they are under a feeling that many times they have been deceived, betrayed by the US, and the US is Middle East policy, Iran policy is backed by the Israeli demand, and that's why they need to be united. They need to stay firm against the foreign aggression to preserve their integrity and independence. This is the feeling in Tehran, in Iran, actually. But nevertheless, I think in addition to the regional countries like Turkey, like Pakistan, like Egypt, which they are doing everything to mediate between Iran and the US, we need a more powerful gesture and presence of the other UN Security Council resolution members like China, like France, like UK, like Russia. I mean, this is an issue which really threatens not only the security stability in the region, but it threatens the security stability worldwide. This is the biggest mandate of United Nations Security Council to preserve the international peace and security. This crisis needs more involvement from the other member of United Nations Security Council permanent members to be involved, to be engaged, to mediate, and to push for peace.
Understood. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mr. Seyed Hossein Mousavian, visiting research collaborator at Princeton University and formerly a Iranian nuclear negotiator. Thank you so much for your thorough explanation and your insights into the situation. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.